And welcome into PressBox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of PressBox and PressBoxOnline.com. With me, with his mustache and his headsets, is the old left-hander, Ross Grimsley. Ross, how are you?
How you doing, Stan? Everything's good, buddy.
All right, good. Got a very special guest on tonight. The baseball season of 2020 is in the history books. And it was a World Series won by the Los Angeles Dodgers, their first in 32 years since 1988 when Kirk Gibson hit that big home run against Dennis Eckersley in I think it was game one of that World Series. Anyway, the team they beat this year was the Tampa Bay Rays. And we have radio play-by-play man and an old Stan the Fan intern, which makes me feel exceedingly old.
Yes, sir.
And I'm sure it makes him feel old, too. Andy Freed. Andy joins us. Andy, how are you?
It's great being with you. I've been devouring a bunch of the other interviews that you've done here. And in my wheelhouse, watching Singleton, Bunbury, Dempsey, you had DeSensei on. And, you know, I've been listening to you, Stan, as you know, since you first started really in 1983 on WFBR. And so I hardly feel like I belong here, but I guess I'm old enough to have graduated into this club. Thank you for having me.
You've graduated big time. You just finished up your 16th season in the Rays broadcast booth. And one of the things, and I'm not going to say this like facetiously or funny. One of the amazing things about your 16-year run there is that your partner, Dave Willis, he was a rookie the same year you were a rookie in the big leagues. You came from different locales, but that's highly unusual to have two guys get their first major league play-by-play jobs and keep them for 16 years in the same place.
Well, we're very fortunate. We were hired the same day at the same time. We didn't know each other. There had been two guys that were doing the Devil Rays, Charlie Slows and Paul Olden, since the beginning of the franchise. And the Devil Rays decided to take the broadcast in-house. In so doing, they wanted their new set of broadcasters. When do you ever see a team hire two broadcasters at the same time? And yet it worked out. And, you know, it's a crapshoot. You don't know if you're going to get along with your partner, really, especially someone you've never known. But Dave and I went out to dinner that night, and we both come from the minor leagues. We both had kind of young families. We both had daughters. And we just linked. You know, we got the job, and you may remember it was a rather tumultuous ownership under Vince Namoli.
Yes.
And we were hired. We had already been hired. We moved down, and Vince said, "I want those guys to go over to Ed Smith Stadium, which wasn't the Orioles yet, and do a mock broadcast." So we went over there. It was, I think, the Reds at the time. And we looked at each other and we said, we're hired, we've moved down, but if these 3 innings don't go well, do we go back home? I mean, what's the deal? Thankfully, it was the end of his ownership in a couple of months. And Dave and I, we just, you know, who knows why you click with somebody, but we clicked, and it's been there ever since.
Well, I do want to dig in deep on the Tampa Bay Rays as an organization. So we'll talk about Namoli to Stuart Steinberg, right? Steinberg?
Stu Sternberg.
Stu Sternberg. I want to talk about that and how the Rays have turned out to be one of the most progressive organizations. And we'll do that in just a couple of minutes. But I want to get the Baltimore stuff out of the way. When I met you, you interned, you were a good friend with Matt Schlissel. And Matt brought you in and said, Andy would like to do some score updates on your show. And back then we took anybody, you know, that came in because it was 10-1. And Ross, you would have been perfect. You would have been perfect.
Absolutely.
But all kidding aside, so where did you go to high school? And you were at Towson when you started doing score updates with me.
Yeah, I'm from Ellicott City. I went to Mount Hebron High School in Howard County, and I went to Towson. And Stan, I remember that day we were at Loyola. Towson basketball, which I was doing, was playing Loyola. And I remember talking to you in the corner of the gym and with Matt, and I was clicking my heels all the way home. I was so excited because I listened to you forever. I remember when you were doing. I remember I went to a 1980 post-game show in the Hit and Run Club with someone named Laura Charles, who I believe
that was my sister-in-law. Yep.
And I remember seeing an interview then, and then your name came along a couple of years later, and I started listening intently because on WFBR at the time, they first had a show called The Subject of Sports, which was at 7 o'clock, and then you started doing more stuff. and I just became a very quick fan, a fan of Stan the Fan. I just enjoyed it. I think you're just total Baltimore. I think of you like I think of the late Vince Bagley or Keith Mills, or guys to me that just make me feel like I'm home whenever I talk to them. And it was a thrill to be able to intern for you. It really was.
All right. Well, we've got that out of the way, the Baltimore connections. Ross, you got the next couple, and then I'll come back in.
Well, I mean, similar. I want to I'll talk a little bit about that. Knowing, and I read something you used to, I guess as a kid, you'd be in the basement, you'd play games, you'd do broadcasts. Now, as silly as that may sound to some people, I was playing golf many years ago down at Clifton Golf Course, and on a par 3, there was a hole. There were row houses down the way. So we're playing 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. This guy is sitting on a swing broadcasting a game. Now he's doing a baseball game, and I'm going, hey, you can't. It's like he's watching. There's no games going on. So we played a few weeks later. He's doing a football game. Then 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, was that you?
I can tell you. Yeah, to be honest, when I was growing up in Ellicott City, my family was not a sports family at all. I've said this many times. I could have said to my dad, who worked at BWI, he was an aircraft mechanic, didn't know anything about sports. I'll give you $100 bill if you can tell me where shortstop is. There's no way. There was no interest in sports in my family. But my uncle was my mother's brother, and she took me to Memorial Stadium. He took me to Memorial Stadium August 9th, 1979. And that was the day that completely changed my life. And I won't go on forever about it. But bottom line, there was a rain delay in the game. And I remember the Orioles wore their orange uniforms, and the Brewers were there. And it was a pretty good game, as it turned out. Flanagan threw a complete game. But the most important part for me was going around inside Memorial Stadium during about an hour and a half rain delay. And I got all the senses of what it felt like to be what felt to me like a big league cathedral. I had never been to anything like that before. The sights, the sounds, the smells, I got to take it all in. And what I remember most about it, as we were in a concession line getting some food during the rain delay, I heard these voices that I didn't know where they were coming from. And I remember asking my uncle, what is that sound? Who are these people talking? And he said, they're the announcers. And it was Chuck Thompson and Bill O'Donnell. And
right.
To me, I loved their partnership. I thought they seemed like great friends. And as you guys know, Chuck was as good as there ever has been. Yeah. And talk about someone that makes you feel like you're almost he was a very paternal figure. I mean, you almost felt like he was your uncle or your grandfather or your father or whatever.
Right.
And from then on, I just started listening to Orioles baseball, and something about baseball and the radio meant a lot to me. And the fact, too, that the Orioles were so good in '79. The FBR took over, and it was like Orioles 24 hours a day. They were constantly playing highlights. They made it a really cool thing to be at with modern music at the ballpark, and that took me over. So without going on too long, yes, I started broadcasting baseball games in my basement. I'd stay up overnight when the rest of the family went to sleep. So I had the whole with no interruptions. I still have those tapes over in my room. And then when I got old enough, I got a chance to be an intern with John Miller. And kind of be a more formal part of things. And at Towson, they had their own radio station, so I just kind of went loose. So this kind of has been my plan since I was 8 years old, and remarkably fortunate that it actually worked out right.
Yeah. Well, I know you did college, you did some soccer, you've done obviously baseball, minor league, Pawtucket, Port St. Lucie, Trenton. Riding the buses. I did it 31 years. I know exactly. Baseball, you met your wife in baseball. I met mine in baseball. Very, very important thing. A lot of good things happened, but going back to the college and minor leagues, how important was that for you to get where you're at right now?
Vital, completely vital. It doesn't happen without that. I mean, I really feel that spending 11 years in the minor leagues was just about the right amount. I mean, because I can remember Rex Barney, being when I was interning Memorial Stadium, and I would just talk to him about his career and whatever. And I remember him saying, one thing that I hope you never remember, that you never forget, is that you can never stop learning about baseball. And he felt that honestly.
Right.
And I've taken that lesson through the minor leagues. My goodness, some of the managers in the minor leagues, DeMarlo Hale, Buddy Bailey, Ken Maka, Rafael Landestoy, everybody has a different perspective on the game. And I used to love and getting the opportunity to when the game was over, go into the manager's office or go out to dinner with them or a drink late at night and just go over the game. And the minutia that they could get into was just crazy. I can remember my first year in single A ball, we went out to dinner after some road game. And I can remember the manager turning and saying to me, he goes, you know, that 2-1 pitch to so-and-so in the fourth inning, did you think that was high?
Right.
I remember thinking, oh my God, they're looking at this game on such a different level that I could ever, all I wanted to do was listen. So you never stop learning. It's so much fun. That's one thing I love about the Rays is that their perspective is so out of left field from what is traditional and standard baseball that while I think it does rub a lot of people the wrong way, it was born out of necessity. They were trying to figure out how in the world can we compete with Yankees, Red Sox, even Orioles, Blue Jays. All those teams have their own television networks. All of them have streams of revenue that the Rays could never and will never have. And so they're always trying to think of something wacky and different. And that it's been a great lesson to me from being in the minors, knowing that there's always a new and different perspective on the game. And one of my favorite things is I'll never know it all. I'm constantly learning about the game. And to me, that's maybe the most fun part about it.
Sure.
You know, that's the old adage about baseball is you can see every day you go to the ballpark, you can literally see something that you've never seen before. I mean, take the end of game 5 in the World Series.
4.
Game 4. I have never seen a game end that way before. You know, when it looked like a certain Dodger victory,
Right.
and they turned it into so. But I wanted to get back to the Rays and the changeover. So you got hired by Vince Namoli, and then within about a year and a half, Stu Sternberg took the team over, right? His group of investors.
Yeah, I got hired February 1st of 2005. I didn't know it at the time, but Stu was already pretty heavily involved, not in the decision making. He was not majority owner yet, but there are a lot of his people like Andrew Friedman, Matt Silverman, among others, that were already working to get ready for the transfer. You know, my first year, I was just so happy-go-lucky to be in baseball. I hardly knew anything that was going on around me. Come to find out, I knew that they were on the verge of being sold, but it was still a little surprising at the end of 2005. Stu took over in October of 2005, and he really did. His thought was to come in like the knight on a white horse and save the franchise, and he kind of did. I mean, when I got there, you know, and people may or may not remember because it's a kind of long time ago, but like the Tampa Bay Devil Rays would be a punchline on The Late Show with David Letterman, you know, on the top 10 list. We were the symbol of what not to be as a franchise, not only as players and as an organization, but even down here within the community. They were a complete joke. They had burned all bridges within the community. They were going absolutely nowhere. They were locked into this lease through 2027, and it was really a kind of a toilet bowl, to be perfectly honest with you, to not mince words. And then Stu took over, and they kind of jumped the line a bit. I think they thought in 2006 they would really bottom out. In 2007 they'd get a little better, but they were really targeting 2010 as a year to really compete. Sometimes you jump the line, and 2008 came along.
And 2008 came along, yeah. I mean, I wanted to have you on to talk a little bit about your World Series experience, thinking it was your first World Series. And then when I researched, again, you've been there 16 seasons, so you were part of 2008. Tell us, when did you realize that this thing was it, I think Madden gets most of that credit because he gave the team credibility, but really it was Andrew Friedman, wasn't it?
It was Andrew Friedman, and probably to a degree Chuck Lamar, who did not have a very successful general manager tenure with the Rays, but under his watch, there were a pretty good amount of players that ended up being a big part of it. You know, B.J. Upton was a big part of it. You know, he traded for Scott Kazmir. James Shields was one of his draftees. Delman Young they ended up trading him in what was the most important trade for the franchise probably ever, in getting Matt Garza and Jason Bartlett back. So he deserves some credit, but Andrew and Stu and Matt deserve the lion's share of it, because not only was hiring Madden the right hire at the time, but they were patient and they were committed to doing things in a new and different way. I can remember talking to Andrew quite a bit, saying, well, do you want to do this the way like the Indians were a hot team at the time and the Twins were a hot team at the time around 05, 06, 07? And he said, no, we're really going to do this our own way. They had looked at, I remember the team that they were looking at, believe it or not, was the Milwaukee Brewers. And what they were doing defensively, I think they thought was ahead of the game. Now, they didn't have the players to make it look good, but a lot of the shifts came from the idea of looking at what the Brewers were doing, even though those players didn't have the range that our players did. And turning the corner was, and Ross, you could probably appreciate that this as much as anybody. As much as the hitting got better and the pitching, of course, got better, the defense got better. And overnight, from 07 to 08, those ground balls that were going through in 07 weren't going through anymore. And suddenly, innings that were blowing up to 4 and 5 run innings weren't even getting started anymore. So the fact that they solidified the defense, it was kind of the first step. Then the pitching came along, and then the hitting came along. And then at that point, Joe was becoming a rock star with us and became really the face of the franchise, even more so than any other player.
You know, the pitching in the Tampa Bay, or I know when I was in Augusta for years, and but anyway, we would play against the Tampa Bay minor league teams when I was with the Giants, and they always had decent arms. They always had good arms. They always produced some pitchers. What did they do different than a lot of the other teams? What was their
what's their secret sauce? What's their secret
basically.
sauce? Yeah.
I don't think there's one secret sauce. I think there's numerous little bits of sauce all throughout. Pitching and defense is the standard phrase. You know, it's not unlike Earl's pitching defense in the 3-run homer in that sense.
Sure.
But I think everyone getting on the same page was part of it. This organization was all in different branches. And then when Andrew and Stu and Matt and Joe Madden came along, they really streamlined it. And another guy that probably deserves some credit is Jerry Hunsaker, who of course had a great run as general manager with the Astros and the Mets and a couple other teams. They were all really suddenly really streamlined, and the organization went from chaos and out of order. You know, they didn't, when I first got here, Lou Piniella was manager the first year. And I can remember being in Anaheim one day, and they maybe post All-Star break of 05, and talking to Lou about, well, what is your scouting report on this or this team? He goes, you want to see my scouting report? Here's my scouting report. It was a handwritten piece of paper with a couple of notes on it. And that was it. Within a year, you had an entire baseball operations department looking for little bits of information here and there and culling together things. So Joe, you know, they joke about Joe Girardi with Binder Joe. Joe suddenly had mountains of information to go through. And I can remember him saying to me, because I'd ask him, you know, one of the great things is that you could be so candid with him. And that goes for Andrew and Matt and all of them. I said, well, but how can you even go through all this information? Does it really work? You know, you're making these wacky moves. And he said, if you have all this information that we've invested millions of dollars on, it's at your disposal. We think that's the way we're going to get this done. Wouldn't you be a fool not to use it? Because somebody in 1920 thought that this is the way the game should be played. And that's always kind of stuck with me, even through Kevin Cash taking out Blake Snell, and I'm sure we're going to touch on it.
Oh, yeah.
Very much committed. They're committed to making what they think is going to work. And it has. For the most part, it has.
Ross, go ahead.
Yeah, no, well, getting to the Snell thing, you know, and seeing, you know, I got out, my last year was 2014, just when this stuff started to take on the analytics and what have you. And which, hey, we did it, but we didn't do it with computers. You know, we didn't have all the, I mean, you could see if a guy, the spin rates and stuff, you knew if a guy had a good curveball, you saw it. But that comes back to the Snell thing and seeing this guy dealing and not having the experience as some of these Ivy League people do, but seeing Snell throw, you knew from the first pitch, first inning, that he was on and they weren't catching up to him. And that was a good possibility. And when they took him out, the Dodgers were elated. They were excited. And then to bring, who'd they bring in?
Nick Anderson.
Nick Anderson. Yeah, Nick
Anderson had been getting hit. So where everybody just, and I'm watching it with people, everybody's just going, what are they doing? And that's when you go, you got to see it and you got to have the experience. And that's one of the things that I feel. But I want to get your input on it. And even I'm sure you talked to Cash and what his thoughts were and ideas. Just a little, fill us in a little bit on that.
That night, even afterwards, when he's getting bombarded I mean, you know, for him, it felt like the world was collapsing on him. And we're a couple of weeks
Sure.
later, probably going to win Manager of the Year tomorrow. That being said, he said it still kind of makes him sick the way it turned out. But as he said, even at the time, it makes me sick the way it turned out, but I don't really feel like I made the wrong move. And I can understand where he is coming from, but to know that, you have to know how many years they've been building for stuff like that. The Rays dipped their toe into the water around 15 and 16 with third time through the order. I can remember we had a pitcher named Nate Carnes who ended up pitching for the Orioles for a while. And there was a night, in fact, it might have even been against the Orioles, where he threw, I think it was 6 innings, a one-hit shutout. If I'm not mistaken, with like 49 pitches. It was just ridiculous. And they took him out. And we're going nuts, going, what in the world are they doing? Well, they went away from it a little bit. They go back to it. Then 2018 came along, and all of our starting pitchers got hurt at the same time. And we stunk. We were horrendous at the beginning of 2018. And they kind of decided at that point in time, you know what? Let's scratch every itch on this. Let's jump into it. We're at the bottom of the American League East. We're probably not going to go anywhere outside of 5th place, maybe 4th, because the Orioles were so bad. But let's do this. Let's just jump into it. And when they jumped into it, man, they jumped into it. Middle of May, they start with the opener. It starts to work. Players around the league, offensive players, saying how much they hate it, which was more fuel to the fact that this may be a good idea. You have to know your personnel. You have to know when to use it and when not. Bottom line, to get back to this 2020 World Series and the decision, I wasn't shocked that they did it. And the reason was because it was 1-0. Now, do I think it was the right move? No, I don't. And I didn't at the time. Dave and I on the air were going, oh my God. I think we found like the one pitcher that can actually get this Dodger lineup out, and they're taking him out. And I remember we threw to commercial break during the pitching change, and I leaned back in my chair and I said to Dave, I sure as hell hope they know what they're doing. And lo and behold, you know, if Nick Anderson is pitching like he was 5 weeks before, it's probably not the worst move. You know, people didn't complain when they did the same thing with Charlie Morton in Game 7 of the ALCS and took him out in I think it was a 3-0 lead after 66 pitches through 6 innings. They brought in Anderson, and 2 pitches later, it gets a double play, and the Rays maintain the lead. It's dictated by the score. I heard an interview with Bob Costas recently, which I think he hit on a lot of the main parts, but where he was wrong was when he said that it was preordained before the game that Blake Snell is only facing 2 times through the order. That's not right. It's not preordained. It has a lot to do with the score of the game. It was 1-0. If it's 3-0, I think Snell stays in the game.
Yeah.
And look, I still think it was the wrong move, even beside the fact that it didn't work, because you could tell the tenor of the game changed, the Dodger clubhouse dugout changed, the feeling in the ballpark changed. I think sometimes you do have to look at it and think, look, we've got the one guy that can get all those hitters out. But at some point, if the Rays were going to only score 1 run and going to have to win the game 1-0, Nick Anderson was going to face the heart of that lineup. So what gives me a little bit of solace is that if we were going to score 1 run, we probably weren't going to win 1-0 anyway. Yeah. That being said, I would have liked to see what would have happened, maybe if we could have.
Not really.
It's interesting.
Something for the future.
It's interesting the way Kevin Cash, I watched him because I play fantasy baseball, so I keep a close eye on opposing teams, and I had Nick Anderson. It seemed this year that come hell or high water, Kevin Cash did not want to anoint anybody as his closer. He wanted to have a hot hand to use at the preeminent time in a game. Andy, is that right?
Without a doubt. And they've been saying that for years. You know, Joe Madden shied away from ever saying, we've got a closer. Now, it turned out to be certain years where a guy like Fernando Rodney would step forward, or Kyle Farnsworth had one last great year with the Rays. Some of the other guys that they got a little fortune with, Joel Peralta. But they've never wanted to anoint a closer. Now, the cynic might say maybe because they don't want to pay closers.
A closer, right.
And that's probably part of it. That's something this organization has to constantly deal with and always will probably have to deal with. But Nick Anderson, I think, what did I see? He was the only, I could be wrong on this, but I think he was the only pitcher in baseball to pitch in every inning from the 3rd to the 9th this year. You know, he never appeared in the 1st inning or the 2nd inning of a game. Right. He appeared in every other inning at some point.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah.
It is pretty amazing. And you know, complete games just don't happen anymore. The last time the Rays had a complete game was May of 2016. And I think we'll be saying that for a long time. They just don't value that anymore. That's not the way pitchers are brought up. Ross, I look at your career stats and I see years where you pitched in 40 games, 39 starts,
Oh,
and
yeah.
like 16 or 17 complete games. It's just not the way it
Right.
is anymore. So, you know, the part of it too that concerns me, I think one thing that I really learned this postseason is that I thought that the bullpen would be really fresh, considering that it was only a 60-game season, and then right into the postseason. So my thinking was, well, for these guys, it's kind of like July or August. Where I was wrong was when I look back now, and when you hear the guys say it, there was the off-season ramp up, the spring training, then the shutdown.
Right.
Guys were all over the country not knowing how to train. Charlie Morton, who lives near me in Bradenton, was throwing into a net in his backyard to try to get ready for this spring training 2.0. So the whole training setup was all messed up coming in. When the regular season started, we had guys like Snell and Glasnow who weren't even close to being stretched out yet. They were going like 2 innings. So by the time you get into postseason and you go the length of the series with the Yankees and you go the lengths of the series all 7 with the Astros, some of these guys were gassed. And I think we found out that Fairbanks and Anderson and Castillo, the Dodgers scored against all of them during the postseason, when really during the regular season not many teams did.
So
That's what. Yeah, I was just, let me add this, Stan. You know, there at one time there were 200 pitchers that couldn't pitch, and that was because of you shut spring training down, and then I mean you're building arm strength all during spring training, and even at the beginning of the season, they shut it down, then ramped it up all of a sudden in 2 weeks, and then you had more guys going down. So that was really something. And I know Tampa, the Rays, they lost several bullpen guys. I think they have 4 guys with Tommy John surgery. And that's just one of the teams. These other ones got the same thing going, which is really, and that we'll get to that, I think, in a minute about what are they going to do to, you know, keep the salary down and go out and get some people to fill in. I mean, they got Morton, who is possibly gone, but they're still interested in him from what I understand. And there's several guys where salary arbitration. So this is going to be interesting for the Rays, and I'd like to get your input on that.
It is. Well, I'll tell you what, in one of your interviews I was watching back, Ken Singleton hit on something. You interviewed him right around the trading deadline in September 1st. And I learned this, I think we all did, 6 weeks is necessary. I never thought it was. I thought that the cynic in me was saying, well, you know,
it's 2 weeks too long. Yeah, everybody thought that. Yeah.
They just want to sell some tickets in the spring training venues and make some money. But turns out I was wrong. They need every bit of that 6 weeks. Not for the hitters. The hitters are ready to go 2.5 weeks in. Right. But the pitchers, they need it. They really do.
You know what was interesting about this season that I think we underestimated too? Like you were saying, you thought relief pitchers would be fresh. I think because it was a 60-game season, that they immediately started using relief pitchers a lot because every game was so important, vitally important. You couldn't afford a 6 or 7 game losing streak that you could afford in 162 games.
Absolutely. And I tell you, for this franchise, there was a point in the year where we had blown by the Yankees. It looked like we were probably going to win the division. For the Yankees, they were looking at it as, well, let's almost like an extended spring training. We know we're going to be in the playoffs. Everybody's getting in this year. Everybody that's semi-decent is getting in. So let's, pace ourselves and get everybody healthy by the time the end of the month of September comes along. I think the Rays were looking at it a little bit differently. For this franchise, it's very important to win the American League East.
Yeah.
And it means something. It means something to our fans. It means something to the organization. I can tell you that after we clinched the American League East, we were in New York against the Mets, and there was a organization, a company-wide Zoom meeting, and hundreds. I mean, I think Matt told me once there's maybe 800 people that work for the Rays, literally all over the country. Everybody was invited, and we all got together and toasted each other because that's a big deal for this franchise. So I think to play through the end of September, to win the division and get the #1 seed with the best record might not have been that important to some of the other franchises, but to us, it meant a lot. And it means a lot for the selling of this franchise to our fan base, which continues to be a challenge. And who knows where we're going to end up and what's going to end up happening. But bottom line, winning 3 American League Easts since 2008, not just as a feather in the cap, but I think it's a real, it's just an important thing that ripples through our organization from top to bottom.
It's really interesting to look at this postseason. I think you and I talked about it in email form or texting today. But you had 4 teams make the Final Four. You had Houston, Tampa, the Dodgers, and who did the Dodgers play? Atlanta. Okay.
Right.
Atlanta was the only team that didn't have an executive that with ties to the Rays. You had Andrew Friedman, who came from you guys, James Click, who's now the GM of the Astros. He was like Eric Neander's number one assistant. And then you had Eric Neander and Matt, running the baseball operation. So the Rays it's such a weird thing to think of this organization as sort of really the epicenter of all that's sort of going on analytically now.
It's got, this organization has a very unique cross to bear because they're progressive, as you said. They're at the forefront of things. They're willing to take the hit publicly for things when they don't work. But then the other teams tend to catch up, and then they've got the salary and the payroll that the Rays don't have. So it's a constant trying to stay ahead. And when you lose endless amount of executives, Chaim Bloom goes to the Red Sox. I forget too. Rocco Baldelli was an important coach. He's managing the Twins. Charlie Montoya, when the organization forever, goes to the Blue Jays. Derek Shelton was our hitting coach for many years. He's the manager of the Pirates. There's other ones that I'm forgetting every year. And Matt Quatrero, who you're going to be hearing more, our bench coach, he's going to end up getting a managerial job somewhere with somebody. And I think the point of it is, like your guys' first question, they try to figure out what is the secret sauce. And I don't care how much payroll your organization can have. Every owner, all 30 owners, are looking to say, how can we win and lower the overhead? Right. How does that team do it where they can have the lowest payroll and still win? There's a reason why our guys are so sought after.
So I've got to ask you a question. I'm flying down to spring training in March 3rd or 4th. And I'm reading, I think it was the USA Today, the baseball issue, and I'm reading something. Somebody wrote an article about the trade where you guys made with the Cardinals to pick up DH outfielder Jose Martinez, who was thought to be a great hitter, not much of a defender. And you guys gave up a very highly touted left-handed pitcher named Michael Liberatore, right?
Matthew
Liberatore, like a 6'5". This guy could be like an Andrew Miller, okay? Yeah. And yet a throw-in in the deal was Randy Arozarena. And this article was basically saying that's the guy that Tampa really wanted in the trade. Tell us a little bit about how, you must know the back door on that story about how they knew about it.
Well, to me, one of the great things about working for the Rays is that, A-Rod liked to say, they're a bunch of Ivy Leaguers with their noses in the air. Maybe there are some, but not really with the Rays. These guys are great to talk to and to find out backstories of trades and moves. For example, I don't want to dismiss the one you're saying, Stan, but the one that always fascinates me, there's two lately that have really fascinated me because you hear these stories as they go along. One is how we made the trade to get Glasnow, Meadows, and Shane Baz for Chris Archer. That trade, those skids were greased from a very unpopular trade. Early in 18, the Rays traded Corey Dickerson coming off an all-star season to the Pirates, and they didn't get much back. They got Daniel Hudson, who ended up going on he never pitched for us. He went on to the Nationals and had some success, and a minor league infielder named Tristan Gray. But because of that trade, the Rays knew the Pirates organization so very well that they had identified those three players. And I don't even know if they thought they'd be able to get Baz also. My sense is they probably could have made the move just for Meadows and Glasnow. Yeah. No one's ever actually said that, but you got that feeling that they kind of asked for Baz also. Can we have him too? And it ended up working out pretty well. So those are interesting. Hearing how they got Willie Adames in the David Price deal back in 2014. Willie Adames, they were impressed with his attitude as much as they were his talent. He was the youngest player in the Midwest League, and yet he was the leader of the team. And our head of pro scouting saw him, and he couldn't take his eyes off of him, even though he wasn't the main guy that he was scouting that day. So I remember the day of that trade. I remember Joe Madden said, it's okay, but we're not exactly thinking that we, stole the farm here from anybody. Lo and behold, they picked up their future shortstop. Yeah. So those stories are amazing. We had heard, to get back to your Cardinal one, we had heard about Jose Martinez. They were interested in him forever because we couldn't figure out how he was. And I say I'm no part of that front office. They're well more in depth than I am, but I never could figure out why he was with a National League team. He's not a good defender, and there's no DH. So he was constantly a pinch hitter. And I can remember when I started to hear from the inside that we were interested in him, all I was thinking was, well, he could DH and he could hit against Chapman in the ninth. You know, whenever you face the Yankees, you're looking for a right-handed bat off the bench. You're looking to face Chapman and Britton. There's our link. Come to find out, years went by. You know, they were interested in him years ago. Come to find out, they could get him, but the real guy that they identified was Randy Rosarena. And to give up Matthew Liberatore, for this organization to give up pitching, a number one pick that they paid, I forgot 1 point whatever for, it tells you how much they thought that he could be an interesting pick. The thing that I think the Rays are sensitive to now is that there's a narrative that goes around, don't trade with the Rays, they're going to fleece your system. That's really not the case. There have been plenty of trades that haven't. They've made some, moves. They don't all work, and you don't want to fleece everyone else, or no one's going to deal with you anymore. But look, the stars of this year for the Rays, and I don't mean to ramble on here, but the stars of this year were, to me, the pro scouting department, because they were able to get some under the hood, as they say, guys. John Curtis, who had never gotten a real chance, ended up being a bullpen guy. Ryan Thompson, a double-A pitcher coming off Tommy John. They got him. Nick Anderson, who they got last year, who was good with the Marlins and took off with us. There's other guys that I'm forgetting. Ryan Sheriff hadn't pitched in 2 years with the Cardinals. So all these kind of under-the-hood guys. Pete Fairbanks, who had been a two Tommy John guy, they got him. So it's all those moves that aren't that splashy that ended up helping to form a bullpen. So at risk of rambling on, those behind-the-scenes stories of trades are always fascinating.
Ross, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we talked about a little bit earlier, Andy, with the subtraction of the minor league teams coming up. There's not a lot of happy people with that. What's your thoughts on that? Also, you got that. You have some of the rule changes. I think they're going to expand, have expanded playoffs for next year. Obviously, keeping some of the rules, but I can just see things happening and putting more of these rules in. What are your thoughts on those two things?
Most of those rules, to me, to quicken the pace of the game, are just eyewash. They're a complete waste of time. I don't think they have had any impact, if you want to talk about pace of game. And really, pace of game, to me, the fact that, I'm not saying it's not an issue, but the fact that baseball makes it such an issue, to me, is such a negative cloud that is constantly hanging over the head. Did anyone think in Game 4 of that World Series, that game was about 4 hours? I didn't look at my watch. I never hear it from fans. I only hear it from executives. I always hear it from people that are trying to write on deadline or want their broadcast to be over for whatever reason. I never hear from a fan that a game,
it was that game yesterday
and 3:05 today, so I'm never going back again. I never hear that thing. Now, do I think that the pace of the game could pick up at times? Yes. But if you're talking about saving 10 seconds on an intentional walk, what a waste of time for that. It's not the worst thing in the world. Okay, send a guy to first.
Right.
Big deal. It does nothing. And in terms of some of the other stuff that they do, the 3-batter minimum, I think, was just a complete mess. It made no difference whatsoever. The pitching change that would have happened, say, in the 6th inning, ends up being pushed off to the 7th inning. It's the same thing. So to me, those moves didn't mean much to me.
How about the extra inning rule, though? Because when I heard that 4 years ago that they were experimenting, I thought it was a nightmare. I found that it actually made the game, I know it's such an abomination to a purist, but it made the actual extra innings, each inning, very interesting.
It did. I think one thing I really learned, and you probably would concur, is that whoever's the home team compared to the visiting team in that 10th inning, they manage the game very differently. In the top of the inning, you're looking to get as many runs as you can. In the bottom of the inning, usually you're just trying to get one.
Right.
I thought it was going to be much more formulaic, that whoever got a runner on second, you were going to bunt a guy over and then go for a back fly and score without a hit. Generally, though, in this day and age, teams just don't bunt anyway. So It seemed like that you're trying to tack on as many as you can when you can. But if you come up and it's a tie game and it's the bottom of the 10th inning, it's a whole different game. I don't really like it. I saw it once in the minor leagues. I brought my kids to a Bradenton Marauders game, and they were playing a game, and I was like, well, that's kind of interesting if you're trying to save pitchers. But bottom line, I'd like to see that go away. The one that really sends a shiver up my spine is that when we were out in the World Series in Arlington, you started to hear whispers about neutral site World Series, not a bad idea.
Yeah.
That to me would be such a shame. It was okay for this year. I think that's fine. It made sense. And look, there was probably lots of behind the scenes reasons that they did it in Arlington. They had a brand new ballpark and no one to play. But to me, to rob the home fans of World Series home games, to me, would be
I'm not sure we've seen the end of that, though. I'm not sure we've seen the end of that. How about what Ross brought up, the minor leagues and the contraction of minor league teams? I know how special the minors are to you because they gave you your opportunity. There's also going to be players that won't. I think something will be invented that we don't know right now to take the place of these lost teams. But your thoughts on a contraction of minor league baseball?
A couple thoughts of it. I'm still really in the learning phase of it. I still haven't quite figured out exactly why they're doing this the way they're doing it. Usually it comes down to some sort of money and control where MLB wants to be in charge of it. That's probably the most simplistic term. But I think if you're looking to growing the game, I think it's a real mistake to eliminate so many little cities and towns around the country. And not everybody is close enough to a big league ballpark. And I can tell you from being in the Florida State League, the Eastern League, the International League, how much those teams mean to those particular cities. Pawtucket was a signature franchise of that. Little Pawtucket, Rhode Island. It wasn't even Providence. It was a little mill town. And the fact that team is going to be leaving that market regardless.
They're leaving anyway. They're going to Worcester. Yeah.
It's really a shame. I think of those short season A leagues, the New York Penn League. I think of how hard those people in those front offices work to put on a show for those fans, that small town. Minor league baseball is not just Americana, but it's cheap, it's safe, it's great entertainment. It's little kids love it. I think more than being in a big league ballpark, because sometimes the big league ballpark, if you're 5-6 years old, it's almost overwhelming and you can't sit still anyway. So, the mascot's there, you watch the game for a while, you go play a game, you watch the game for a while. I think it's a wonderful introduction. I'm heartbroken for what's happening in one of my alma maters in Trenton, because the Trenton Thunder were really not only a signature franchise of the Eastern League, there had been no minor league baseball since the early 50s in Trenton, the state capital of New Jersey. After Willie Mays and the Trenton Giants left, there was no minor league baseball there. Trenton got a team. They got the London, Ontario Tigers in '93 and brought them to Trenton. It became very successful overnight. Suddenly they're drawing 500,000 people a season in a place where there was none. My wife's from there, and she tells me just how much that team coming meant to that entire area. Because of their success, suddenly you have independent league teams sprouting up on all sides, a team in Somerset, a team in Atlantic City, a team in Camden. And little by little, you're siphoning off, people, instead of then having to drive 45 minutes, they only had to go 10 minutes to their local ballpark. So I felt there was something wrong with that. It didn't seem right because the independent league teams could kind of do whatever they wanted and trying to sell it as AA, AAA talent, which it wasn't. It just frankly wasn't. You'd have some guys that could go from independent league and make it to the big leagues and they'd spotlight that. But generally, the players in the independent league are guys that couldn't get jobs in affiliated baseball. So it hurts my heart to know that Major League Baseball has decided to partner with independent leagues. And the fact that the Yankees have chosen to leave Trenton in the dust and go to what was a competitor independent league team hurts me greatly. But I guess that's progress moving forward. I have I don't have a dog in the fight outside of, I hope Major League Baseball knows what they're doing.
You know what Trenton's motto is?
Trenton makes, the world takes.
There it is. Andy knows it. Trenton makes, the world takes.
Yep.
I've got two last questions for you, Andrew. Andy, when you were a kid, 8 years old, and you were broadcasting games in your basement, or you went outside and watched people play, and you're doing broadcasting, did you do regular season games or World Series games? My question is essentially, how different is it when you're doing the World Series?
Oh, it's a joy. I mean, it's funny when you come from the minor leagues. I think it gives you a different perspective. I can remember I went from interning at the Orioles in the early years of Camden Yards, where there's sold out every night, and my first month in single A ball in the Florida State League, which doesn't tend to draw too well anyway. I remember we had some home run in the middle of the game, and I'm going, it's gone, home run, and there's no crowd noise. The guy gets to second base, and you're hearing it fades out. His parents have stopped clapping, and you're like, oh my God, I've got. So my point being is that if it's wonderful training ground. If you can make that interesting and sound good in front of game 2 of a doubleheader in front of 50 people at 1 o'clock in the morning than doing Major League Baseball. Wow, that's quite a difference. And doing the World Series, I think that the best part about it, Stan, is that I remember Steve Braun. Remember him? He was a really good pinch hitter. He played with the
outfielder, Twins.
Outfielder, the 8th great pinch hitter. He told me one time that in 1982, he came up as a pinch hitter in Game 7 of the World Series against Pete Ladd, who was a hard-throwing reliever for the Brewers. And the bases were loaded, if I'm not mistaken. I think I'm getting that right. And he said he got to home plate, and he looked out at Pete Ladd and realized that he and Pete Ladd were not only at the biggest moments of their professional lives, but there was such intent focus at that moment. And broadcasting a World Series game has reminded me of that, is the amazing amount of focus on each and every pitch. We're in a neutral site in Arlington, Texas. It was more Dodger fans than Rays fans, but you hear the crowd noise, and then the pitch comes in, and for that split second, it's dead silence until something happens. And to be able to have that focus, physically exhausted, broadcasting the game, physically exhausted at the end of a World Series, just because that focus has been so heightened. Every pitch really matters.
Right.
That to me is the most fun out of it. I think it brings the best out of you, hopefully.
Great.
Ross, you got one more? Because I got one more. You got one
Well,
more?
there's one thing I wanted. I know Tampa Bay new stadium down there. There's been talk in the past. They had something in Ybor City at one point. Is that not right? And that fell through, I believe. What's the latest on that?
Well, I wish I could give you more. I really only have what is common knowledge down here. They tried to get the ballpark done in St. Petersburg around 0809. That fell through. They were going to play at old Al Lang Stadium, if you remember that training ballpark, which is now home to a soccer team. They were going to turn that into almost like what the Giants have right there on the waterfront. That fell through because the local residents didn't want it. The retirees that were in those high rises near the ballpark, they were pretty organized, and the Rays were not going to be able to get it done. So it took another decade, and they thought that they finally decided, really, that through lots of technicalities and lots of money spent, that it has to be in Tampa, which is where most of the people are. And that fell through also. It was going to be in Ybor City, and that fell through also. So now where they really are, and it's not a bluff. This is ownership that's told us this is not a bluff. They think that the way to save baseball in this area is to have a split season, is to have the first couple of months play here when the weather's nice in an outdoor ballpark, and to have the when it gets so hot and rainy here, come June or July or whatever, to move it up to Montreal. I see that Expos uniform in the background of Boston. I remember you pitching for them, and I have nothing against the people of Montreal.
No.
I've never been. I've always wanted to go. But yeah, it's a strange idea. I can understand why a lot of people have balked at it. I don't know if it's ever going to work, but that is the plan of the organization right now. I've heard through the grapevine that some other organizations have even thought it's not the worst idea in the world. It's funny. The Rays are not afraid of taking a PR hit if they believe in something. And right now, that is their plan.
I can't believe at the end of the day that the Nashville situation wouldn't be a more attractive permanent, because the logistics of the players having to get 2 places to live, you broadcasters, not having a home. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Just one thing about that. It's going to be very difficult to make happen. I think you're playing and preying upon fan loyalty and perhaps discounting some of that. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that. That's my worry about it. I have learned to kind of trust this front office because they've been a step ahead of me every step of the way. And I will say this too, coming from Baltimore, where to this day, I know, Stan, this sounds, you would probably understand, but those that aren't from Baltimore wouldn't understand. When the Colts left, that set a scar. I was 13 years old or 12 years old at the time. And for those of us that lived through that, franchise relocation for me is a naughty word. And I've said this to our owner before, Stu's great you can just be upfront with him. I've told him for years, because he could have up and tried to get this team out of here at any point in time. He's legitimately tried to save baseball in this area. He takes a lot of hits. But I said, Stu, I would have had a hard time working for a guy like an Irsay that was constantly threatening to move. I appreciate as an employee and just as a fan of the team that you're doing your best to try to make it work. And he's kind of a quiet guy.
Yeah.
You'd never know walking around that he's a, half a billionaire, whatever he is. But he legitimately wants to make it work. I think he feels strike one was St. Petersburg, strike two was Tampa. And I think right now this is strike three, or who knows what will happen after 2027, because we'll be in Tropicana Field through 2027. After that, I don't know.
I know some people that knew Larry Lucchino very well, and when he got involved owning the Pawtucket Red Sox as president of the he's the owner of the team, along with a group, but Charlie Steinberg is the president of the team. But I know some people that said to me, Larry understands that move, how painful that would be. He will not do it. He will bend over backwards to do it, to save baseball for Pawtucket. There's got to be two to tango. And I don't see the tango going along with Stu Sternberg. And I think he's doing a fantastic job at doing a one-person tango. And I think they're going to run out of time. My last question, speaking of running out of time, I think we've officially become the longest Zoom that we've done, Ross.
Yeah, you're right.
And for what we make doing this, it's costing us a lot of money.
Yeah.
You just got finished this crazy season, the pandemic season of 60 games. I get a sense everybody thinks, that, hey, everything will be back to normal next year. I don't think everything's going to be coming close to being back to normal. I think it's going to be like maybe 100-game season. I don't think the teams are going to go to spring training homes. I think they will end up training, in my opinion, in their home ballparks. And it's going to be like 100-game season. What do you think is going to happen? And I think if fans can be allowed 5,000 or 10,000 a game, you might get some fans in ballparks the first half of the summer. And then maybe by then, the pandemic will be on the wane. So your thoughts?
I mean, it's all guesswork at this point, but I don't see this virus being done in 3 months. And that's basically when we report for pitchers and catchers. Nothing has been announced, and I don't know anything from the inside at all. But from the outside, I think you could be right on a number of those fronts except one. I think that, first of all, spring training may not happen in the little ballparks. They might just be like they were this year in the big ballparks. I think you're right that they will probably have some degree of fans there. I think we saw when we were at the World Series how that can work. And three, the players themselves are now used to an understanding of what happens with regard to travel and how the teams that were able to stick to protocols can really make this work. The one part I think you're probably off is that I think they'll try to do a 162 strictly for the reason that they need the revenue television-wise. I mean, I think they desperately need that right now. If for no other reason, they need to help pay down the debts of what they weren't able to provide for content this year to the networks. That being said, also, this was the first year that I ever felt. I'm not someone that feels self-important in any way. I think I'm just kind of lucky to be along for the ride. But this year felt a little bit different because we were the only way that fans could consume baseball. And some of the letters that we get from fans this year, the one that sticks out to me is we got a letter from a lady that said that her mother is in hospice. She wasn't going to make it much longer, but she was hanging on because she had to hear how her Rays finished the season during the World Series. She listened to every pitch. It was the first time I've ever felt in my career that what Dave and I were doing had a little bit of a higher purpose than just broadcasting a little baseball game. So I think fans really got into the fact that they were good, but the only way they could get it was television and radio.
Yeah.
All right. He's Andy Freed. This guy was an intern for me 28 years ago for
Holy
2 years.
cow.
And he's gone on to be the play-by-play voice of the Tampa Bay Rays along with Dave Willis. Andy, really appreciate your coming on with us.
Anytime, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
How about next Monday?
Hey,
Just kidding. Just kidding. For Andy Freed and my friend Ross Grimsley, I'm Stan the Fan Charles. We'll see you Wednesday night. Gary Stein and I will have the Athletics Ravens beat writer Jeff Sreeback. Thank you for tuning in.